Indiana and Iowa. They're going to meet this year on college football, and it's a game that could be very crucial for both sides. It's a locked on crossover of Hoosiers and Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in. It is a Locked On Crossover edition. I'm Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers. He is Trent Condon of Locked On Hawkeyes. Excited to bring this to you, part of a series we have been doing across the network and talking about games coming up on the schedule this year in college football. And Trent, these two teams are going to meet. It's Indiana and Iowa, a game that takes place on September 27th at your house. And it's one that could be very, very exciting just from a college football Big Ten perspective.
Yeah, it really is. It'll be a big one. I think a pivotal one for both of these programs and kind of what the ascension possibly could be for both of them as we get later into the season. And it is odd, obviously, with the old East-West divide. Just haven't seen the Hoosiers nearly as much. Growing up, it was basically a yearly occurrence, and that has not been the case here recently. A few years back, you guys came in as a preseason top 25 team after the 2020 season, and Iowa quickly dispatched them in that one. But it's been a rarity. We just haven't had a ton of these matchups, so it feels almost like, for us, something new, something a little bit different. And we got, of course, the 4 West Coast schools, but you couple this in here. It's fun to see some of our old friends again.
Yeah, well, this is a great opportunity here throughout the summer for us to kind of, I guess, inform the other fan base, right, of what each team is going to look like, what the rosters are, how the makeup is going to be, and then kind of some expectations. We're going to talk about the game itself and where it falls into the schedule. We are going to talk a little basketball a little bit later, too, because I know both of us are looking to continue to grow on that side of things. But tell us what your roster looks like in terms of what Iowa's bringing back from a year ago, what they've brought in with this new era of transfer portal, and how they might exceed expectations in 2025.
Yeah, I mean, when you start with the expectations, kind of the baseline for Iowa football is 8-4, right? I mean, that's what they're going to be seemingly every single year, is an 8-4 team. Over the last 5 years, before last season, it was with dreadful offense and an elite level defense. And a year ago, Iowa came into the season with some big expectations, not only a schedule outside of the Ohio State game that looked very manageable, but coupled with a lot of returning starters, 19 returning starters from a year ago, and it just didn't click. The defense did take a step back, even with all those veterans, and that led to some frustration, certainly, because we're just not used to that. The offense did take a step forward last year, went from 15 points a game up to 27 points per game. So you did see that improvement, but it wasn't in the passing game. And that's really the hope this year. Really, the biggest headline out of the transfer portal is the addition of Mark Gronowski, the Walter Payton Award winner from South Dakota State, 2-time national champion, elevated that program to a level that they'd never been before, bringing national championships to South Dakota State. And that is where things start. Over 10,000 career yards, over nearly 40 touchdowns on the ground. This is a guy that is a physical specimen, shoulder surgery, or he would have likely been in the NFL draft. And when Iowa beats Miami for a quarterback and they have to go down to Carson Beck, I think that says a lot of what not just Iowa, but people across the country think about Mark Gronowski. And maybe this is going to be finally the guy, year number 2 of Tim Lester, the offensive coordinator, that this passing game finally can take a step forward.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like with you guys, everything is there except a consistent scoring threat, right? I mean, you've got the defense, the special teams is one of the best in the country. I mean, it's just how it goes. And if you guys are able to put up, 28, 30 points a game, I mean, you guys are going to win some games on this schedule. And our friends at FanDuel have it at 7.5 is the win total. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago on the Big Ten squad. And this schedule, I look at it, Trent, and it's weird. It's just awkward. You've got a game against Iowa State week 2 of the season, and you got to go to Wisconsin. You do get to host Penn State and Oregon and Indiana, but you also take a West Coast trip to USC. I mean, your thoughts on just kind of how the schedule's all laid out for the Hawkeyes?
Yeah, when you got 3 rivalry games on the road, I mean, that's always difficult. Going to Ames, and though Iowa's won there over the last decade every single time, it's still a road game and a team that's actually beat you in Kinnick Stadium the last 2 times that they've made their way over there, a team that played a year ago in the Big 12 championship game. The road tilt to Wisconsin, Iowa absolutely throttled them a year ago, but Camp Randall has never been a great place for Iowa historically, certainly over the last quarter century. And then at the end of the season, the Black Friday game against Nebraska, though Iowa seemingly always wins that game by a field goal, it's it's going to be physical, hard fought, and likely come down to the wire. Then you mentioned those other aspects for it. Expectations are not what they were a year ago, but the way the schedule lays out, you've heard it before. You don't have Ohio State and Michigan on your schedule. This is the year to make it happen. And Iowa did that back in 2015. This year, Iowa doesn't have Michigan or Ohio State on the schedule, but 3 teams that were in the college football playoff a year ago, you guys, Oregon, Penn State, a team that was a game away in Iowa State that was there. The schedule is incredibly difficult. If they can have a special season, there might be a path for Iowa to make a run. So let's flip it the other way. Just give us a little bit, the Hawkeye fans out there learning a little bit more about the Hoosiers, because we've been strangers now the last 4 years. Fill us in after last year's Cinderella run.
And it was, look, it was a Cinderella run. It was a story of the season in college football. And I think a lot of people outside of Indiana have said, well, that was cute. That was fun. We'll see you later. Right? We enjoyed it while it was lasting, right? But my take is, and I truly believe this, is the fact that Indiana reloaded. Indiana brought in a lot of talent where they needed it, and they returned a lot of talent where they couldn't afford to lose it. You're talking about Aiden Fisher, an All-American linebacker, D'Angelo Pons, an All-American secondary corner. You're talking about Michael Kamar on the defensive line, who I think will compete to be an All-American this season on the defensive side of the football. And then offensively, you bring back your 2 best receivers in Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper. You bring in 3 starting offensive linemen, including Pat Coogan from Notre Dame, who will be your starting center. And then the big name is Fernando Mendoza. You bring in the California transfer quarterback who is very smart, very high IQ, and doesn't turn the football over. He was winning games at California, man. I mean, if you can win out there, you could win just about anywhere. And so he steps into an offense that will be very constructed. It will be very manageable for him, but can still put up a ton of points. And you start talking about schedule a little bit, Trent. Ours isn't terrible, but we do have to go to Oregon, to Penn State, and to Iowa. Those games all scare the crap out of me, man. They really do.
So for you guys, after that Cinderella season a year ago, give us an overview of the fan base, kind of where the temperature is, because we've seen so many teams flash in the pan, come out of nowhere, and then they take that step back and are kind of quickly forgotten. For the fan base, where are the expectations? Is it college football playoff and bust? Hey, let's make that next step and get to Indianapolis next year. Where is the temperature of the Indiana fan base?
It's a good question because it's hard to judge it because it's Indiana, right? I mean, you're talking about a program that historically at one time had the most losses ever in college football. Like, that's not really the crown you want to wear. That's not really the t-shirt you want to walk around town in, but it's just a fact. And now you have this very quick, very rapid, very high success where you won double-digit games, you go to a college football playoff, and then you extend Kurt Cignetti. You keep a lot of your big-name players. You go and get transfer portal additions at positions that you needed. I think expectations are to have a say in who makes the college football playoff and be relevant in November. Don't just crash and burn, go 500 and just wear off all the fancy polish that you put on the car. But I don't think it's realistic, at least right now, for Indiana fans to say, well, you did it once, you better do it again, or else. It's not fair to say that, but I do believe the roster is good enough to get there again. Now, if this was a 4-team college football playoff or the 2-team BCS or something like that, yeah, it'd be a lot more difficult, but we're talking about expanded playoff here. We're talking about several teams that make it. Indiana was the beneficiary of that a year ago, and I think the Hoosiers can be right there to do it again. And so I think the win total of 8.5 will crush. I think Indiana will beat that, but to sit here and say, we better make a college football playoff, I don't think that's fair to say right now.
Makes a whole lot of sense. It's going to be a fun season. And, well, I want to talk a little bit kind of matchup wise, how we're looking here. I know we're going to get into some basketball too.
So we will talk some Indiana and Iowa in terms of the game itself, Trent, because this one is fascinating to me just in terms of the matchups we could see, the different coaching styles we'll see, the atmosphere that we'll see, but also where on the schedule this falls. That's the thing that sticks out to me because it's not nearly halfway, but it's close. And we've been talking about some of these schedules and the fact that you guys have a couple of tough games, the game against Iowa State. Not that I think Rutgers is all that, but you do have to go on the road. Then you get to host Indiana, and the Hoosiers have a couple of tough games there. I mean, we're talking about a game that could make or break those expectations or win totals with our friends at FanDuel. I feel like that's a fair thing to say, no?
Oh, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I think this could be one of those deciding type of games. And, when you look at the Rutgers game that you mentioned, it's going to be a short week. Iowa's going to play a night game the week before. Yes, it's against UMass, but then have to go out there on a Friday night. That's a tricky spot. Now, the good news when we look at it with the Iowa-Indiana matchup is Iowa's going to get an extra day to prepare. So they get that extra day advantage that they're going to have on that part of it. And I wonder also, this game has not been scheduled in terms of TV. This is one we're going to have to wait for. Now, what kind of window this is going to get if Iowa gets off to a good start, and they go into that one and they're 4-0. You guys go into that one, and we know with the non-conference schedule, definitely should get through that one unscathed.
I hope so.
Yeah, we might be talking about, like we had a few years back, where it is a ranked matchup going into that one, and really could be a decider and become, when we'll flip the calendar after that to October, suddenly Indiana or Iowa is part of the big college football conversation.
Yeah, and for Indiana, I mean, you mentioned it. We play our 3 non-conference cupcake games right in the beginning of the season, back to back to back. I hate it. I am not a fan of it. I am by no means defending it, but there's nothing I can do because it is what it is. But after those games, we have Illinois. We have Illinois at home in Bloomington. And I don't know how you feel about the Illini. We won't go super deep into this, but I'm not a believer yet. But that game does scare me because that's our first real game of the season. And depending on how that game goes, then we have to travel to Iowa. I mean, you're talking about a 2 or 3 game stretch when then we have to go to Oregon after that. I mean, that's a stretch in the Indiana football schedule that could either go really, really good or it could go really, really bad. And that's why this game against Iowa on the road is just so tricky to me.
Yeah, Illinois is also kind of almost in the same boat as you guys, at least for me. Though it was 9-3 versus 11-1, it's still all right. Prove it, because I've watched a lot of big football during my 45 years here on Earth, and I've seen your Hoosiers take those steps up and then quickly take the step back down. I've seen Illinois do the exact same thing. So those are 2 programs that I look at as similar ilk coming into 2025. In fact, if I had to take a wager, if I had to take one of those 2 teams to be there in the conversation come November, I'd actually lean the Illini. I hate to say it to you, but that's the reality that I see it right now. I love Mendoza. I really do. And when you guys got him out of the portal, I thought that was an absolute slam dunk. Zignetti, he's got the bravado. He's certainly a different kind of guy than Kirk Ferentz over there. That'll be interesting to see. Here, wonder what their conversation is going to be like on the sidelines before the game.
Yeah, midfield. What are they going to talk about when they're looking up and looking around before the game kicks off? And so I want to ask you, in a game like this where it's in the schedule, the teams that are going up against each other and just all facets of this, what is it? And this may be a hard question to answer right now in the end of June, early July, but what is it in that type of a game that could give Iowa an advantage? Is it being at home? Is it coming off the extra day? Is it just a position that you feel really, really good about Iowa into this year? What is that factor for you, at least right now, that could give the Hawkeyes an advantage in a game like this?
I definitely start with the home field advantage. Kinnick Stadium, one of the best environments in college football, and we've seen that throughout the years. We've seen big-time teams come in there, top 2, 3 teams, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, and all walk away with losses. So the environment, and certainly if we get a night environment, we get a mid-afternoon game, something like that, the environment at Kinnick Stadium is incredible. Since they redid the north end zone, just how much louder, already one of the loudest stadiums in the country, how much louder that place is. So you start with that one, and this is a team I think offensively is going to be better. I look at this game, though, and I think Iowa, if they need to win the game, 31-27, I believe they have the offense to do that. And that's been just such a rarity to have that kind of conversation that, there's certain games you got to score to win. And I think Iowa's going to have the ability to do that this year,
which is just something different that we haven't seen. And so I will tell Indiana fans, don't go into this game against Iowa and say, oh, well, that's the team that kicks field goals, right? That's the team that's got the best punter in the nation. We don't have to worry about that game. This game scares me, man. It really, really does, because of what I said with Illinois the week before. Then you have to play Oregon. You still have to make a trip to Penn State. I mean, I look at this game for Indiana as one. it's hard to say must win right now, but it could. It absolutely could, because I'm not saying Indiana's going to go on the road to Eugene and win. I'm not saying we're going to Happy Valley and winning. And then you start talking about being on the verge of a college football playoff. These are the ones you have to win, but it could be somewhat of a resume builder for Iowa if they're able to pull it off and get this win over what could be a top 25 Indiana team at the time. I mean, this could really accelerate the season for Iowa, I think.
I'm with you. And when I go through and I look at just the way that this matchup goes, I want to pose it this way to you. So Iowa, I think their biggest question mark is probably at the linebacker spot. They lose All-American Jay Higgins, they lose Nick Jackson, an All Big Ten player. You lose those kind of players in the middle of it. It's either going to go veterans, guys that have been around, have been waiting their turn, or they're going to go incredibly young. And really, the biggest change from Iowa defensively a year ago is just what a big step that they took back in the back four, in the defensive backfield, something that just is usually rarely a problem. When you look at this Indiana team, as we talked about Mendoza and what they're going to be able to do in the passing game, that's where the concern lies with this Iowa defense. And I think the hole you can poke in this team is the back seven of them defensively and what they're going to do. And there's individual talents that you get excited about. What would be that weak spot for Indiana? If you're really poking a hole in this team and they're going to take a big step this year, what would be the position group that you'd be pointing at?
You know, last year when you watched Indiana play, especially on the biggest stages against Ohio State and Notre Dame, it was the obvious glaring situation and problem that you just didn't have the dudes up front on either side of the football. And I do think the offensive line was a major concern, but I do think you addressed those in the transfer portal. But you know as well as I do, just because they were starters at one place doesn't mean you can put them all together and that it all comes together properly in another place. And so I am in see it to believe it mode with the offensive line. I think the running back room is still a question mark too. It's kind of by committee at the moment, waiting for a couple of guys, whether they're returners or transfer portal guys, to maybe emerge, right, and become that running back one or RB2, things like that. And so and until Indiana can prove to me on a consistent basis, Trent, that they can compete up front on both sides, I'm going to be worried about it, even against teams like an Illinois or an Iowa or Michigan State, who have some serious dudes, maybe not to the Ohio State, Penn State level, but guys that can straight get after it, guys who can make a difference up front. Indiana's going to have to find a way to prove it against these teams, especially on the road when we have to go to Iowa in the season. That game on September 27th. I did not know you guys played 2 Friday games where we're going to be playing 2 Friday games also. We're playing on Black Friday at the end of the season. Indiana Purdue is on Black Friday for the first time in the history of its existence. So I don't love the idea of 2 Friday games, but that just means we get to relax on Saturday afternoons, right?
It's the new reality for you, and it's something that was thrust upon us when Nebraska made the move into the Big Ten. They traditionally, obviously, played the games against Colorado, and before that against Oklahoma. So it was a tradition there. Iowa jumped right in. There was a 1-year hiatus from that, and then it's back on the schedule, and I think it's going to be the case going forward. It just means got to bring the leftovers to your tailgate, right? A little turkey while you're getting ready for the game.
That's right. Well, hey, we continue a Locked On crossover edition between Hoosiers and Hawkeyes, and when these two get together, we got to talk a little basketball, right? We'll do that in our final segment here on a Locked On crossover episode. All right, final segment, Locked On crossover with Hoosiers and Hawkeyes, and we're by no means wishing away the football season. We're both very excited for that, as are our fan bases, but basketball is still awesome, and basketball season is all the time in these two places, and there's a lot of changes going on with these two places. 2 new coaches have now joined the conference of the Big Ten. What is the excitement level at Iowa for the new man in town?
You know, it's so interesting because, well, it was the 2 coaches that were talked about a lot here that were maybe up for the Indiana job. Darren Devries, obviously an Iowa native, a name that people know, his brother, an All-American, an NFL player that played for the Hawkeyes. And with Devries, he's a guy that a lot of people thought was coming home. There was a lot of speculation those last couple of weeks of the season that it was almost a foregone conclusion that Devries was going to be the coach. And if that Indiana offer didn't come, that he was going to be the guy. But Indiana moved quickly. They wanted to have everything in place so they could get moving in the portal very quickly and made that happen. You know, I do wonder, though, if Darren DeVries doesn't take the Indiana job, would Ben McCollum be the Indiana coach?
I think it's a possibility. I mean, it's so funny because the DeVries thing, you said it came about like that. I mean, it was a very quick moving thing. And I mean, there were so many names thrown around for Indiana. We went from Jay Wright to Bruce Pearl to Nate Oates. Then we went to Scott Drew at Baylor. Then we went to, I mean, just everywhere. We went all over the spectrum of coaches around college basketball. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, Darren DeVries is interested. Oh, Indiana's interested. Oh, this is happening. Boom, here it is. Ben McCollum was on that list, and I think he is an excellent coach. I like the DeVries hire. I'm happy with it, but I'm very excited about what he's going to be doing in Iowa because I think he's a really good coach.
He is, and just hearing him talk, he first of all gets it. And for longtime viewers and older people that remember Iowa basketball, like I did growing up in the '80s and '90s, and what it was, and the importance of it, and the formation of the Hawkeye Television Network before you guys took the idea and did the same thing in Indiana, it was a huge thing. It was the winter conversation piece in the state of Iowa was Hawkeye basketball, and that fell off. And you can blame your boy Steve Alford. That was a part of that when he came in, and boy wonder just was not that. And then we went from there to the disaster that was Todd Licklider, another guy from the Hoosier State. Man, we're really struggling with those guys. Fran McCaffrey brought him back to relevancy. Fran McCaffrey brought them back to the levels that Dr. Tom Davis had them. Good enough to make the tournaments more years than not. They can win a game in the tournament, but that was the upside. In the last couple of years, the fan base checked out. The disappointment of getting knocked off by Oregon in the round of 32 when you're a number 2 seed, the inability to not make a Sweet 16 year after year after year. And the last 2 years, the fan base completely checked out. It probably wasn't fair when you look at Iowa historically and what they were, because he was still winning at least at a relatively good level, but the fan base checked out. They had to make a move, and bringing in Ben McCollum, an Iowan that grew up a Hawkeye fan, knows the program and understands it, but then also talks about defense, something that we haven't seen during the previous 14 years. That gets exciting for Hawkeye fans as bringing back a little bit of that toughness, that grit that had been missing during the last 10 years.
And that's kind of what we're talking about with Indiana, too. I mean, with Darren DeVries, he steps in with a completely new style of coaching and execution than what we've seen over the past, 20 years at Indiana. I mean, we're walking out of the Mike Woodson era where he was a failed NBA coach, but an Indiana legend. Bob Knight loved him. It made sense at the time, and I understand why the hire was made. But my goodness, it just did not work out. I mean, it just crashed and burned. He couldn't win recruiting battles. He wasn't winning games. The in-state kids were going everywhere but IU, and that's just not okay here. And so we moved on from that, a mutual parting or step down or whatever language they wanted to use. And you go after Darren DeVries, and you get him as a guy who has won everywhere he's been. He was really good at Drake. His 1 year at West Virginia, he was battling his team being injured. They were robbed of making the NCAA tournament, and now he is here at Indiana and had to completely restock and reload. I'm sure you guys understand this as well. We have zero. Not a single player returning from a year ago. It's a brand new looking team. It's exciting, but it's also kind of scary, my man.
Yeah, and Iowa saw a couple of guys go over to Creighton. They lost everybody except for one player, Cooper Koch, and you guys might know him over there because recruited him a couple of years ago before he decided to go where Dad went. JR, his dad, back in the '90s. So that's the only returning guy that they have. The excitement, though, is 6 guys from Drake came along with Ben McCollum. You might say, well, come on, that's a step up. Well, remember, the year previous, he brought a bunch of D2 kids from Northwest Missouri State up there. You can't win in the Missouri Valley with a bunch of D2 kids. What do? They win 31 games, a program record, and make it to the second round of the NCAA tournament. There's going to be, I think, some assimilation, but Bennett starting right there. That's where the excitement level is. Iowa hasn't had a point guard like this in an incredibly long time. A guy with his maturity, his ability to beat teams in so many different ways, and there's a lot of excitement there. But we didn't have the same bags, I guess, that you guys have over there for Indiana basketball.
Whoa.
Look at what you guys have been out there spending. Woo! That roster, it better be good with the amount you're putting into it.
I hope so, man. I really do hope so. And there's a lot of pieces to figure out on this team, but you bring in Tucker DeVries, the son of Darren, who was injured a year ago, but he will be one of the best players in the Big Ten this year if he's able to play the entire season. You go and get a top 15 scorer in America in Lamar Wilkerson from Sam Houston. You get Reed Bailey, the center transfer from Davidson, and then just a bunch of pieces around these guys that I think this team is going to score and score a lot. Can they play defense? I don't know. We're going to see. But Darren DeVries says they will. They're going to run and gun. They're going to score early, and they're going to get back and play solid defense. I'm fine with that because Indiana hasn't done any of those things in several years. And so, look, there is some money here. I'll admit there's a couple of dollars that Indiana has paid for the roster, but you had to do something because again, you had nobody coming back, whether they ran out of eligibility, transferred, or did whatever. You just didn't have anybody, and you had to build a roster very, very quickly. And so I'll speak for us in terms of expectations in year one. I think just making the tournament is good. I think getting there, having a little excitement, beating a good team here and there. Heck, if we could beat Purdue like we did a year ago, awesome. Just getting to the tournament for us and just building some positive momentum, I think is good for us. What about you guys in Iowa in year one?
Yeah, I think that's the same kind of baseline. I mean, when you bring in probably the second best point guard in the Big Ten to start things out with Sturts, that's where you have to start. He's in his final year of eligibility. Another guy that could have been in the NBA draft this year, and he might have very well heard his name called last week. So that's kind of what you have with Sturts and what he could have been. He decided he wanted to play one more year with McCollum, take his name very quickly out of it just so he can concentrate on Iowa. When you have a point guard like that, I think that's the baseline. They're not going to be very big inside. They're going to play one of the Drake transfers, Cam Manoir, that's probably 6'6". He's thick, but he's not real tall. They brought in a Robert Morris transfer, 6'10", but he's more of kind of that stretch Euro 4 type. So they're not going to be very big. How that works in the Big Ten, we'll see. But I'm right there with you. I think a baseline expectation, make the tournament, get those big vibes, and maybe most importantly, get people back into Carver Hawkeye Arena.
Yeah, just get people in the building, start winning some recruiting battles, and build up the hype. I think we're kind of in the same boat there in year one early on. And look, Indiana doesn't have a whole lot of big guys either. Reed Bailey's 6'10", and people are yelling at me every day about where the big men are and how we're going to find it and how we're going to survive in the Big Ten without having a big man. But as we're just going to run and gun, I think is what we're going to try and do. And so looking forward to when Indiana and Iowa meet on the hardwood, but they'll meet on the field first. And we're excited for that matchup between Indiana and Iowa. We appreciate everybody joining us for a Locked On crossover edition. Check out everything Trent has going on with Locked On Hawkeyes, myself with Locked On Hoosiers. And until next time, we will talk to you later.